Welcome, everyone, to the Nurses and Engineers Partnering for Patient Safety presentation. My name is Jennifer Ott. I'm the Secretariat for the Healthcare Technology Foundation Committee within the Global Clinical Engineering Alliance. I'm very excited to introduce JoAnne Phillips. JoAnne has been a member of the Healthcare Technology Foundation Committee since 2017. She's a critical care nurse for the past 23 years. She transitioned to a very innovative role as a clinical nurse specialist in patient safety. She's worked for several years in quality and patient safety with a focus on alarm safety, medication safety, and resuscitation. She also developed a rapid response system at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. This looks to be a fantastic presentation. JoAnne, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you for the invitation to discuss this important initiative between nurses and engineers. We are partnering for patient safety. As we all know, healthcare is in a whirlwind of transition. I'm going to take a little bit of time today to talk about the evolution of the relationship between nurses and engineers. We all have the same goals in mind, which is really to ensure patient and staff safety. The 21st century has really brought with us an incredible amount of technology challenges. When I was first a nurse in 1980, we had technology in the ICU, we had technology in the operating rooms, but that's where it ended. Today, excuse me, we have technology everywhere. We have technology on the general care floors, nursing homes, and we even have technology at home. We have many patients who are on infusions at home, who are patients who are on ventilators at home, even dialysis at home. All of these have really escalated the need for partnerships between nurses and clinical engineers. I began my relationship with my clinical engineering partner in 2003 when the first National Patient Safety Goal on alarm safety was introduced. My colleague and I were charged with ensuring that the organization was compliant with the patient safety goal. And it was then that I really began to understand the value of the relationship between myself as the nurse, as a critical care nurse, and our engineering director. What I learned was we think about things differently, but again, we always have the patient safety and staff safety in mind. I think most of you are familiar with the Amy Foundation. In 2011, the Amy Foundation conducted the first Alarm Safety Summit, where it really began to look at what are the issues surrounding alarm safety. There had been a number of unfortunate clinical events related to alarm safety. The National Coalition on Alarm Safety worked from 2012 to 2013. And at the same time, the National Coalition to Promote Continuous Monitoring of Patients Receiving Opioids was in place, as well as the National Coalition on Infusion Therapy Safety, which was done in collaboration with the Infusion Nurses Society, was working. All three of these coalitions combined to the National Coalition to Promote the Safe Use of Complex Technology, which was in place from 2014 to 2018. At that time, the coalition worked in collaboration with the National Association of Clinical Nurse Specialists, of which I was a member. We had the opportunity at that time to present a workshop to the National Association of Clinical Nurse Specialists and publish a series of articles on the safe use of complex technology. This is just really a beginning understanding of the relationship between nurses and engineers. The left upper corner is really the key to this diagram. Design and implement new technologies. Nurses are usually the ones that identify the need for a new technology. They're at the bedside every day. They're the ones that are saying, we really need this equipment to do that, or we need a piece of equipment to do this. And really understanding what our engineering partners can do for us or with us is really essential. I don't think nurses really appreciate or understand the role that engineers play in establishing safe patient environments. I think they quite often nurses see engineers as associated with devices or a piece of equipment, but not so much the generic patient care environment. We all know that ensuring data safety data security is really paramount in our organizations now. The implications for breaches in data safety are immeasurable. We also have to look at the development of effective information technologies for communication. How do, excuse me, how do nurses communicate with patients? How do patients communicate with their providers? I think most of us communicate with our providers now through some sort of a portal system. But when we think about the inpatient world, if you're a nurse, if you're a patient, rather, how do you communicate with your nurse? How do you get the nurse to understand what you need? You know, we've moved so much further ahead than just putting on the nurse's call light that, on how patients and nurses can communicate. In a scoping paper, Zhu and colleagues, they did a scoping review on the interdisciplinary collaboration between nursing and engineers in healthcare. They looked at several different, in all of the papers that they reviewed, they came up with 5 topics where we really have really key interdisciplinary collaborations. The first one is patient safety. And in that, they really identified things like falls, alarm safety, sensory technologies. They looked at length of stay, and they looked at medication safety. Medication safety is probably one of the most complex areas of the crossroads between technology and patient care. Smart pumps, automatic dispensing cabinets, et cetera. One of the other areas of collaboration they identified was symptom management and healthcare management. And many of us, myself included, now wear devices that help with our symptom management. We have patients at home on defibrillators where that data are sent electronically to their providers, and the patient may not even know they're having an issue, and the provider may call and say, you know, I've seen this particular dysrhythmia, or you know, I'm really concerned about you know, changing your blood pressure. The launching and the advent of telehealth has really escalated during the pandemic. As we all recall, many of us were locked in our homes and were not able to get out to get healthcare, but telehealth really took off in that time frame, and it's continuing to escalate. Information systems and nursing HR management. I think nurses spend an incredible amount of time right now in their documentation. We're hoping that nurses will get to the point where they understand the idea of voice to text and start to use things like Dragon software for their documentation. But all of this involves the partnerships with our clinical engineer colleagues. Health education is important for everybody. It's important for providers, it's important for nurses, it's important for patients and families. We have certainly identified that the lack of understanding of healthcare education has resulted in many negative patient outcomes. And then, as we mentioned earlier, nurse to patient communication. How do the nurse and the patient communicate on a day-to-day basis? Zhu and his colleagues identified this somewhat complex model, and I'm going to go through it in a little bit of a different fashion. If you look on the left side of your screen, where I put the red box there, you'll see that model, where it says phase 1, 2, and 3, really mirrors the PDSA cycle, the Plan, Do, Study, Act, that many of us are familiar with from our process improvement work. And that's really what the model is all about, the more complex model, which I'll go over in a second. But phase 1, the requirement analysis, what is it that we need to better and more safely take care of our patients? How do we design it? If the engineer designs something that the nurse says, that's just not going to work, or vice versa, we really need to know what that is. And of course, it needs to be tested in the real world environment. And then phase 4, what worked, what didn't work, and what do we need to do to make this more diffused among our patients and our staff. So those 2 columns in the middle, as I mentioned before, nursing and engineer. In the first phase, those 2 boxes at the top, this is really the design phase. The nurse is going to define the clinical issue. Most likely the nurse will be the one to define the clinical issue because they're the ones that are at the bedside every day. What are some of the solutions to it? Is there something that's already available that the nurse doesn't really know about that can solve that particular clinical issue? The nurse and the engineer together kind of design and create a mock-up of that particular design and device. And then they have to test it. So what is the safest way to test things in the healthcare environment? Is it something that's gonna that will be simplistic, or will it require something that is a true research study that would require a much more in-depth study? And then once we do that, once the study is done, how can we get that rolled out? Who do we need to involve from the organizational perspective? So again, it's a sort of a complex but summary of the Plan, Do, Study, Act model, which I think is really, really key and important. I'm going to show you two simple examples of that model. At the University of Amherst in Massachusetts, they have an incredibly complex and really well-developed innovation center. So this is the model that they have been using. Nurse identifies an unmet clinical need, and I'll show you two examples. So some patients lack the physical ability to push the PCA button to administer medications. So the team they put together was the pain service, the clinical engineers, the pharmacist, and the nurse. And they developed a new device that can be used by the patient that doesn't have the physical ability to push the PCA button, but still needs to get PCA or patient-controlled medications. The second example is during the pandemic, as unfortunately we will all recall, we really struggled with the availability of PPE. So there was a need for face shields that could be easily donned and doffed and could be really rapidly produced with minimal supplies and equipment. So that team was the clinical engineers, the nurses, the engineers and nursing students. And they developed this very simplistic face mask that could be rapidly produced and easily distributed. The pandemic was an incredible time in our lives, which none of us ever want to relive. But we really partnered closely with many people across the organization, in particular our clinical engineering partners. We never in a million years would I ever have thought I would see IV pumps in the hallway. But our goal was that we needed to take care of incredibly sick patients, but we also needed to minimize the use of PPE. So with our partnerships, we developed processes by which we could put IV pumps in the hallway, where we could put CRRT machines in the hallway. You can see that in the right side of that picture. That is a CRRT machine that's outside the patient's door. We also put ventilator screens in the hallway. Again, never in a million years would have ever thought that we would see an environment like this. And of course, like all of us, we hope we never have to again. And just as a little icing on the cake, we also didn't have any visitors. So we had lots of really distraught families. So I think that the work we did during the pandemic really emphasized to us as nurses how important our engineer partnerships are. And it really launched a lot of the work in innovation, the innovation labs that have developed across the country. So here's two sides of the same coin, so to speak. Engineers need to spend more time, not only time in different corners of the hospital, but experiencing nurses' experience. So if you think about it, do you think your colleagues have an appreciation for what the nurse goes through every day, their environment, their supplies, their equipment, their meds, et cetera, et cetera? I'm not really sure, but on the same in the same vein, I am very clear that nurses need to spend time with clinical engineers to understand the how and the why of equipment and the intricacies of repair and maintenance. And I think part of that will be so that you all don't get as many pieces of equipment like this. And I don't know if you can appreciate this, but it's a yellow tag that says repair, but it doesn't say anything, or it says broken. So, help nurses to understand, if you write broken, what will happen is that that piece of equipment will go to engineering, will be evaluated, assessed, and sent back to you. And so unless you tell the engineer what it is that you need to fix, they're not going to be able to fix it. The analogy is, you don't take your car to the dealer and say it's broken. You have to be able to describe exactly what's wrong. So we've got some work to do with our colleagues in helping them to understand that. Some of the other projects that are being worked on at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, in medication infusions, ever since the advent of the smart pump, we've really tried to look at, can we improve the accuracy of medication or medicated infusions? As the infusion pumps have been connected to the EMR, this issue has become even more of an important process to evaluate. When we look at central venous pressure, what is the best position for accurate measurements? And cardiac and telemetry monitoring, what are the best practices? I did my doctoral work on this, and unfortunately, we still have somewhere close to 90% of alarms that are non-actionable. And so that creates alarm fatigue, and I know you all are familiar with what's involved with alarm fatigue and the dangers associated with that. We've talked a lot about partnerships. So one of the questions that, as I was thinking about this is, who are your partners? And I think it's important to understand that in most organizations, you will have a clinical partner and you will have an operational partner or partners. The clinical partners, I mentioned earlier, the National Association of Clinical Nurse Specialists. I am a clinical nurse specialist, which means that I have a master's degree. My master's is in critical care. My doctor's in health system management, but my real focus has always been on critical care. And so clinical nurse specialists focus their practice on a particular clinical area and work with the nurse, the patient, and the system. And that's where we're a little bit different. We're very much system thinkers. You may work with a nurse educator. You may work with a clinical nurse lead. They are master's prepared as well. You may work with from a clinical perspective, but I would find out in your organization, who are those folks that are going to help us to understand the clinical need and help us to really help the staff understand how to use the equipment, how to evaluate it, et cetera. Then on the other hand, you're also going to have some operational partner. They could be a manager or a director. That's somebody who's going to help you to, they work with the vendors. They're going to make sure that the supplies and equipment that you need are there. If there are disposables that need to be in place, make sure they're the right disposables, understand the cost and the implications of those different pieces of disposables. Again, it could be a manager, it could be a director of operations, but these folks are the hands-on equipment people from a nursing perspective. When I was working with Amy and the National Association of Clinical Nurse Specialists, we had the opportunity to put together a workshop for the Clinical Nurse Specialists conference. And with that, we also were able to publish a series of articles on selection and implementation of different types of complex technology. So I created this tool to help folks to really understand how do you go from selection to evaluation. So in the first step, define the need, evaluated safety and efficacy, and looking at human factors. So one of the things that is really important is to make sure that as you're looking at a piece of equipment from different vendors, let's say we use defibrillators as an example. Many years ago, we were looking at defibrillators, and excuse me, one of the vendors was really at me pretty heavily to take a look at his device, and I said to him, there are multiple reports in the MAUDE database about negative outcomes related to your defibrillators. I'm not going to have a discussion with you until those issues are resolved. It's really important. The nurse wouldn't necessarily know to look to those databases to find out if there have been issues with different vendors. Physical and cognitive ergonomics. We talk a lot now about cognitive burden, but cognitive ergonomics is how the nurse thinks about the environment, how the nurse thinks about how the different technologies relate within the environment, et cetera. So those things are really, really important. And human factors can't be understated. We really need to see, how does any technology fit within our workflow? How does it fit within our physical environment, et cetera? FMEA is a failure mode and effects analysis. This is a process that should really be conducted before the introduction of any new technology. Not necessarily if you're buying new defibrillators, if you're buying new CRT machines, but if you're introducing a new device, let's say, for example, your organization had not done post-cardiac arrest cooling, and you were introducing that as a new technology now. A failure mode and effects analysis is really to identify what could possibly go wrong at each step of the intervention, from starting the therapy to maintaining the therapy, et cetera. So that's one of our process improvement tools in our toolbox. When we think about financial analysis, this is really important because the nurse may look at a piece of equipment and say, oh, it costs X amount of dollars, but they may not understand the implications for disposable costs and maintenance costs. And the disposable costs may be, do we use the brand name or do we use the generic disposable? So really, what are the maintenance costs? If a particular device needs to have PM done 3 times a year, 4 times a year, that's a huge financial implication that the nurse really wouldn't have any way to understand. Who makes the final decision? I can tell you it's not likely to be the nurse or the engineer, but I think it's vital that they each have the ability to have input into the decision, the final decision. When we think about education and competency, this includes nurses and engineers, initial and ongoing, but a group that you may not think about that just came to light in some work we're doing in our organization. We were having some issues with our CRT machines and a blood leak alarm. What we discovered was the people who were cleaning the machines didn't really have the expertise to do what they were doing. So we had to bring the vendor in and make sure that the staff cleaning the machines knew what they were doing. The implications for that were that with a blood leak alarm, the system had to be taken down, and those disposable costs again go up and up and up because we didn't have the right structure in place to make sure we were doing things correctly. So strategies. This is really about adoption of new technology, and did the technology deliver the proposed outcomes? Did it work? Did it change practice? Did it improve outcomes? So we've talked a lot about partnerships. So let's think about, what would your next steps be? One of the first things you want to do is publicize your team. Nurses should know who you are and what you can do for them and with them. How can you become more of a partner with the teams that you collaborate with, nurses or even respiratory therapists? Some of the models suggest that either the engineers or the techs be unit-based. So let's say, for example, Jane is the tech that most of the time covers the cardiology floors. Jane is going to become an expert at all equipment cardiology related. And then Sam is the engineer or the tech that covers women's health world. They're going to become experts in those environments, and they will become a known entity to the staff in those environments, whether it's someone from the leadership team or someone from the front line. So it's just something to think about. How do you help the techs to become not just somebody who shows up and fixes something? Listen first. This is important. Don't fix and leave without showing the nurses what the issue was and a brief explanation of how you fixed it. Because maybe by doing that, you can help it from happening again. Speak the same language. This is really important. Be respectful of nurses who are not tech savvy. I'm of that generation. I'm not I'm not terribly tech savvy, but I try to listen. I try to understand. And I know that sometimes nurses are busy and they're just, they just want you to fix it and go. But it's important to help them to understand. make rounds. Safety is in relationships. When I was in a safety role many years ago, one of the things that I did was I made what they called social rounds. I carved out a small amount of time every day to stop by a unit and just say, hi, how are things going? You know, how's your day? What are your issues today, et cetera. So when you're there, the nurse is more likely to say, oh, while you're here, you know what, I saw this. What do you think that means? That kind of question. I think that does help a lot. Are there any particular clinical meetings that might be helpful to you? So are there times when you should attend a nursing practice meeting? Are there times when you should attend medication safety? Are there times when you should attend the Code Blue meeting? So in our organization, we have two really important beta tests that we're doing with Zoll. One is, well, it's not a test anymore, but we have an app on our phones for checking the crash cards. And you know that that's a regulatory key that we have to, the crash cards have to be checked every day. Well, it's all in an app on our phone, but we're also a beta site now for testing an app with Zoll to document during Code Blues, during resuscitation. So we're doing a lot of work with Zoll, but we can't do that, you know, in isolation of our clinical engineer partners. And then make sure that nurses are involved in purchasing decisions. They're the end users. They're the ones that are going to make the difference in whether the equipment is used right or not. I just wanted to mention a few of the education and innovation centers. These are just a few. The University of Massachusetts at Amherst, they have an incredible nursing and engineering and innovation center there that's been funded by a very generous donation from a couple that are an alumni of University of Massachusetts. She is a nurse, he is an engineer. Hopkins has a fellowship opportunity in nursing and engineer. The University of Connecticut, they have what they call their Nurse Eng Innovation Fellowship. Florida Atlantic has nursing and engineering combined degree programs. And Duquesne University has a dual degree in engineering and nursing. It's a 5-year program. Many schools, I am affiliated with the University of Pennsylvania and with the hospital there. And I know that the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing has a Center for Innovation as well. One of my colleagues, one of my friends is the director. They're doing some really great stuff. So our sort of takeaway points from our discussion today is find out in your organization, who are your partners? The way to start a partnership is find out who your partners are. How can you develop relationships with frontline nurses? Trust me, it will be mutually beneficial. Is there anything you can think of right now that you want to discuss with your nurse partners? I'll use our CRRT machine as an example. We started to talk about, what do we do when we run out of machines? And what we discovered was that there were a lot of other issues that we had to really deal with. Among those, the frequency of blood leak alarms. And what are the solutions for that? Are there any clinical meetings that can be beneficial? You'll find out in your organization, you know, if they're going to talk about defibrillators, if they're going to talk about telemetry monitoring, et cetera. And what can you ask of the nurses? Don't be afraid. Something as simple as defining what's wrong instead of just writing down broken on the tag, because I know that just plain doesn't help. Ensure the right stakeholders are present when discussing the purchase of new equipment. You may think that the right stakeholders are there, but you know, take a look around the table and just say, oh, we're talking about defibrillators and the code team's not here, or the ICU telemetry manager's not here. So don't be shy to really talk about that. I've included a list of references from our discussion today. So with that, I want to thank you for this invitation. I will give a little caveat that in addition to the partnerships that I have with my colleagues at work, I also have a 34-year partnership with an engineer that I'm married to. So I think that has helped me as well, because I can talk to him and he can talk to me and we talk together about engineering and all kinds of important medical things. So again, thank you for your time today. And with that, I'm done.